Good morning, I'm Benjamin Self. It's my great honor and privilege to be the moderator, or the interviewer, if you will, for the first session. We're beginning with the conversation on Japan-China relations, in part because, in terms of the large naval capabilities of Asian powers, Japan and China are obviously the hugest, and the potential for maritime clashes between Japan and China has both escalated and raised a tremendous amount of concern here in the United States. We're also beginning with Japan, China, because Ambassador Miyamoto is joining us from Japan, from Tokyo, where it's already quite late at night, and we're grateful to have his cooperation in participating via video link, even though it's very late at night in Tokyo. And so we'd like to get right to the ambassador for his remarks and then follow-up questions on Japan-China relations. I believe we have a video link active.
Hello?
Here we have Ambassador Miyamoto. Thank you, Ambassador.
Yes, first of all, let me join with the friends over there, expressing my deepest condolences to Filipino friends. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to join with you in such a prestigious forum to discuss Japan-China relationships. So let me talk about why. So how long I have a time?
20 minutes. You have 20 minutes.
Okay, it's quite a long time.
Well, you don't need to fill 20 minutes. I have a lot of questions.
Yes, please. But anyway, in my view, Japan and China, particularly their diplomacies, are overtaken by the domestic politics. That is my pressing feelings that our diplomacies now is the hostages of our domestic politics. So when we are going to analyze foreign policies of Japan and China, first of all, we have to analyze their domestic situations. And Japan and China, particularly China, domestic situations become more complicated and paralyzing sometimes Chinese foreign policies. That is a great concern for me, because there is no guarantee at all that these situations should be overcome or improved in the future. So in the case of Japan and China relations these days, particularly with regard to the Senkaku Island issue, the Chinese domestic politics played a very significant role. And first of all, I have to tell you that the Senkaku issues is a continuous process surrounding Japan and China, almost 3 decades. Then China gradually building up its measures against Japan's effective control of those islands, particularly after 2008. In December 2008, China, for the first time, invaded Japanese territorial water around Senkaku Island in 8 hours, and pronouncing that they are conducting their domestic responsibilities, duties to control their territorial waters. That was the first announcement by the Chinese side that they are conducting their official duties in the Senkaku waters. When the Japanese side was very much warned, therefore set up measures to protect our territorial waters. Then in 2010, a Chinese fishing boat crashed with our Coast Guard vessels, and the Japanese side applied newly set up rules to govern the situations. Then that worsened Japan-China diplomatic relations very much. Then 2012, last year, They call it nationalization. In fact, it's a transfer of property right in Japanese interpretation. But anyway, this nationalization by Japan, I must say, it's a so-called nationalization of those islands by Japan, is regarded by China as a new attempt to strengthen its effective control, Japan's effective control over those islands. And therefore, that was a clear departure from the previous policies by Japan. Therefore, they have to take up another countermeasures. Therefore, they continue to send their official ships into Japanese territorial waters thereafter. So what we have to see is a very different pictures were given to both peoples by the Japanese and by the Chinese. And nowadays, Japanese government and Chinese government must conduct based upon these pictures they created and they gave to the people. Therefore, there is a very limited room for maneuvering in terms of diplomacy. Particularly, diplomacy is, as I said, taken over by the domestic concerns. That is the current situation. But there is a group of the very reasonable, what I mean that there is a very leading public opinion leaders in both countries. They started to think that current situation is very irrational in a way. Therefore, we have to correct the situations. Then we have to conduct the business as normal countries in a way. Because the emotions are overwhelmed in our diplomacy's details. We have to calm down and set up the new directions. That is what is happening right now. Japan is ready to have a dialogue with China, particularly with Chinese leaders. But up to now, we didn't have a very positive response from the Chinese side yet. But we are going to see the clear kind of departure in terms of the Chinese foreign policy from the previous 3 to 4 years, the foreign policy directions. Namely, in the past 3 to 4 years, they conducted a very aggressive foreign policy, undermining their relationship with neighborhood. In order to correct these situations, they recently, in October, they held the meeting, and President Xi Jinping announced a new set of diplomacy regarding its neighborhood relationships. That is a kind of cooperative, concerted diplomacy vis-a-vis the neighborhood. It is a very good sign for us. From Japan's side, we are also sending out messages, constructive messages, that Japan is seriously thinking to have the dialogues with the Chinese side. So situations are improving, but still we are in a very difficult situation, particularly regarding senkakus. Our self-defense forces and Chinese Navy are carefully conducting each other. That is good news. But even the Japanese expert on the naval issues are warning me that if an unexpected incident happens, then series of events can bring us to an unimaginable situations that both authorities cannot control well. And there are daily ongoing contacts between the two law enforcement agencies' vessels around Senkakus. There is no rule at all. Situations are very dangerous. I am very much concerned with the current situations. So we have to start negotiations and talks and to rule and govern the situations over there.
And thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much. The focus of this meeting today is on maritime risk reduction measures. So concretely, we know that Japan and China began negotiations for hotlines in case of emergencies. There was an agreement as far back as 1998 to establish a hotline. Where do Japan and China stand in terms of communication? You mentioned the potential for a small accidental incident to escalate dangerously. So where do the two countries stand, not in terms of their domestic procedures, but in terms of their bilateral communication tools to prevent some unintended accidental incident from escalating into a confrontation, maybe even between the two military establishments?
It's very regrettable to say, but no development at all between two government negotiations. Again, a kind of cultural conflict between two governments. Chinese side say, if there is no leadership agreement between two countries, they cannot move ahead. I mean, the middle class and the lower echelons of the bureaucracy cannot move ahead. The Japanese side said, if so, why not start with the lower and middle level in the consultations? Mm-hmm. But again, by doing so, we believe that we can build a confidence in both sides. But again, this is cultural difficulties between two governments. They cannot go ahead. We are willing to do so, but it's a current situation.
Mr. Ambassador, when you were in China between 2006 and 2010, Japan and China achieved a rather remarkable breakthrough agreement on the East China Sea. Not the Senkaku Islands, but other disputed territorial issues were resolved in 2008. But shortly thereafter, you mentioned at the end of 2008, China began its aggressive efforts to claim control or to dispute Japanese control of the Senkakus. So do you see the Chinese reversing course after the hard-won negotiations to achieve the 2008 agreement?
We have to understand there are always two groups at minimum, two groups of opinions prevailing in China. One time, one opinion gaining strength, other time, another opinion. So during my days in Beijing, very fortunately, those who believe that strengthening the relations with Japan is well served their national interests, these people in China are gaining upper hand. Therefore, they succeeded in reaching agreement with us. But later on, the domestic situations changed. When I say 2008, December 2008, Japan, China, and Korea were going to have the summit for the first time. Independent summit meeting among three countries were going to be held in Japan. Before a week or so, Chinese maritime agencies conducted that kind of the invasion of Japanese territorial water just before Prime Minister Wenjaba visiting Japan. So this is another signal. There are conflicts in the government. So one branch of government going to Japan and strengthen the relations with Japan, but simultaneously there are another group that objecting this goal too.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You've mentioned previously the importance of understanding each other. Both Japan should understand China better, and the Chinese should make more effort to understand Japan and to establish communication. To do so, we need, it seems, more people like you, a strong core of experts, Japan hands in the Chinese side and China hands on the Japanese side. But it's been said that the cadre of such people has been declining over time. What's your expectation or hope or recommendation for developing better understanding of each side?
You know, all the time, the opinion by experts be respected. But at the same time, experts should be trained as a true experts that can earn the trust from the people. But anyway, for the time being, that kind of objective understanding of China or Japan is not well received by the public. That's our basic problem. So first of all, gradually, we have to build up such kind of the group of people and influencing the public opinion. It takes time, but we have to do so. First of all, we have to strengthen our core groups of people. Then we have to expand. But very unfortunately, this core group of people is, as you said, is declining. It's a pity.
Mr. Ambassador, as you know, the United States, by its alliance security treaty with Japan, is certainly committed to the defense of territories under the administration of Japan, including the Senkakus. The U.S. government has made this very clear. But what role could the U.S. play as a good faith negotiator, a mediator, to help develop the maritime risk reduction measures between Japan and China?
First of all, we have to convince the Chinese side by establishing this maritime regime. This serves their interest. There are a lot of misunderstanding and mistrust toward this already established international regime by the Chinese side. So first of all, we have to do every possible effort to convince the Chinese side this serves their best interest. In this regard, the United States has enormous experiences and knowledge to tell the Chinese side. That is very, very important. Simultaneously, the Japanese side also must understand this Chinese sentiment, psychology. And we have to provide a set of the good arguments that really serve their national interests. So Japan and the United States can work together with the Chinese and other friends in the ASEAN country, and convincing the Chinese side that this best serves their national interests.
You've, over the years of your handling China affairs for the Foreign Ministry of Japan, even before becoming ambassador in responsible roles, have seen crises emerge again and again in Sino-Japanese relations. And often these are accompanied by huge waves of public protest in China, even riots, including damage to Japanese facilities, consulates and embassies. And then a return to some kind of normality, some kind of quiet. But again, these crises erupt in the relationship, and the Chinese people explode with hostility towards Japan. How do you feel that even if you can find a quieting now, as you mentioned in October, the Chinese have shown signs of taking a softer posture for the moment, how do you feel confident that in the future you won't see the same cycle repeat again?
As I said, that China-Japan policy is very much dominated by their domestic concerns. So they have to overcome domestic problems by themselves. Enormous internal infighting, conflicts of opinions, disaffection by the people towards the governance, and all of them, bringing Chinese authorities to the outside world, something negative, aggressive attitudes to buy back their support domestically. So that is a fundamental question. We have to help the Chinese to solve their domestic problems. That is a fundamental and the best way to solve our bilateral relations. But secondly, we have to minimize the impact of our own conduct or expressions that might hurt the Chinese feeling. And thirdly, in the long run, we have to rebuild a mutual understanding much better than now. And by improving their living standard in China, and they regain their confidence on themselves, I think Japan factor might play a less and less important role in the Chinese politics.
We can certainly hope that will eventually come to be the case. However, there are many who are concerned that China's hide your strength and bide your time policy under Deng Xiaoping is only waiting for the correct moment for China to assert some regional hegemony. And people argue that even if Japan and China can reach an agreement now to put the Senkaku issue back on the shelf, that in a matter of only a few years, China's Coast Guard capabilities and Blue Water Navy capabilities will enable them to push once again, that they will again take this issue back off the shelf. Do you feel that just putting Senkakus back on the shelf is an appropriate measure, or should the two sides push much towards an actual resolution of the sovereignty dispute?
I think that the most important aspect of these issues is on China, in China itself. In my view, China needs their own worldview. They lost their traditional value system. In a way, they lost a socialism value system compared to the current situation in China. So they must rebuild their own value system again back in China and bringing about new world vision based upon their own value system. If they can achieve this goal, then we can see what direction China is heading for in the future. But currently, we don't see that world vision of China, their value system. Therefore, we are not sure. China becoming bigger and bigger, stronger and stronger, but we don't know in what direction they are heading for, and what kind of impact they might give us in the future. That is the core issue for me. That's why I am asking Chinese friends, speaking to them, what is your world vision? What is the value system you are going to support in the future? If we don't have right now, it's time for you to think about it and tell the world what is your world vision. And that is, in the long run, is the most important. Currently, as you said, it's very, very difficult to solve these Senkaku issues in the years to come. So we must find out that to freeze the issue for the time being, 5 years, 10 years, maximum 15 years, I'm afraid. But using those period of time, we have to think about how we can really deal with this issue without damaging our bilateral relations. And our wisdom is tested.
Excellent. Thank you so much, sir. If I may, your very big picture concerns, I think, do get at the heart of the issue. But today, as we're trying to narrow back in and focus on the immediate problems of potential clash or potential accidental incident, how can we take even a baby step, a small policy in Tokyo and in Washington, without waiting for Beijing to come around? What can we do concretely to reduce the risk of a maritime incident?
What I am thinking about is Japan and US and other friends in the Pacific can come out our reasonably positioned set of rules and regimes that the older members of the Pacific community must abide by. And we have to use these concrete case examples to show the Chinese that can serve your best interest in the long run. So it's very important. I appreciate your works very much because this kind of the concrete works that can end up with such kind of concrete proposal for the entire Pacific community. Then we can speak to Chinese. This is the final result we are going to seeking for. Therefore, China must join. That approach is very productive. That's why I am very much appreciating your work in Washington, D.C.
Again, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We appreciate your time tonight. We appreciate how very late you've been willing to stay to help with us. And I'd hope that those of us here in Washington could join together in thanking you for your insights and comments.
I thank you very much.